Hi, my name's Lucy Chiswell. I'm the Dorset Curatorial Fellow for paintings from 1600 to 1800 at the National Gallery. And today I'm going to talk to you about 3 landscapes in the National Gallery collection from the comfort of my own sitting room. This is in a bid to celebrate the outside world. As you all know, spring is a time for nature to really draw attention to itself, blossoming and blooming into vibrant colour. And although it's harder for us to access nature at this current moment, I thought this was precisely why we should look at it, using the paintings perhaps as a means through which we can access the outside world, or simply just as a reminder to appreciate it when and where we can. So I'm going to talk about 3 landscape paintings depicting 3 different times of day, starting with the early morning. So we're starting in the very early morning here with this beautiful landscape painting by Peter Paul Rubens, the great Flemish 17th century artist. And I've always been drawn to this painting mainly because of its sheer scale. Now, another thing that draws me to the painting is the very unusual perspective with which Rubens is painting this landscape. We're not standing within it, we are kind of looking down and into the landscape, which very much draws you into the picture. He composes the picture of these horizontal bands of colour. So the bottom half of the painting is kind of composed of this reddish brown tone with this very strong accent of red on the blouse of the lady riding to the market in her cart. And this transitions then into a kind of pastel-y greenish yellow colour where we see these long shadows cast by trees from the early morning sun, which then transitions in turn into a very hazy blue distance, which makes up this sort of infinite horizon. The sky, of course, is golden in the early morning sunshine. So we have these very strong bands of colour, and I always think that it reminds me slightly of the abstract expressionists who are to come about 300 years later, this way of kind of drawing us into the picture in these very kind of meditative colour fields. Now, Rubens is an artist who enjoyed an incredibly successful and prosperous career. He had a very successful workshop in Antwerp, and he worked for a number of different rulers and kings and queens around Europe. But in 1630, he returns to his home in Antwerp, and he purchases this 16th century manor house called Steen, which we can see on the left-hand side of the picture here. And he retreats there in the summer months from 1635, when he buys the manor house, to his death in 1640. And he uses it as a kind of retreat from which he can really immerse himself in the Flemish landscape. And he paints these pictures really for himself rather than for sale or for any particular patron. Now, until this moment, landscape painting had usually been used as a kind of scenery or a backdrop to a narrative, whereas in the 17th century, Dutch and Flemish artists were particularly keen to make landscape the protagonist of the picture and to celebrate it in its own right. And we very much see Rubens doing that here. That said, he very much enlivens the composition with a number of figures, and we can see this lovely huntsman crouching beneath this sprawling blackberry bush in the foreground here, with his lurcher by his side, ready to take on the unassuming partridges that we see beyond the stump of the tree there. But what happens is he starts this incredible trail of trees that again pull us down into the back of the painting. Another detail I really love is the glint of the light reflecting on the glazed windows in the manor house. So that transitions us rather nicely into the 19th century in England. And the transition is made even stronger because this painting, which I'm sure is incredibly familiar to many of you, one of the most famous paintings in the National Gallery collection, and indeed in the country or perhaps even the world, this is the Wain by John Constable, painted in 1821. And its connection to the Rubens is particularly interesting because Constable actually admired Rubens' view from Steen in the collection of Beaumont, with whom Constable was particularly friendly. And it brings us to the middle of the day, to midday. And we know that because this picture was submitted to the Royal Academy in 1821 with the title Landscape Noon, and it was subsequently given the nickname the Wain in reference to this wagon that we can see making its way into the centre of the composition. Now, like Rubens, Constable here is painting somewhere that is very close to his own heart. He is painting a scene not far from his own home or in his home county, Suffolk. This is Flatford Mill. It's a scene that we are very familiar with from Constable's compositions, and it was a mill, a corn grinding mill that was owned by his father and had been in the Constable family for over 100 years. And we see the mill pond here. We don't get a view of the mill itself, which is sort of on the right-hand side beyond the picture. And we have this lovely little cottage on the left, which was owned by a gentleman called Willie Lott, who was a tenant farmer who had lived there for his entire life. So it's a very gentle scene, very much in admiration of the Dutch and Flemish painters of the 17th century, 200 years before. But what I've always loved about the Wain is the conversation and the dialogue between the natural elements in the painting. Of course, we have to have Constable's distinctive clouds, and I love the way they transition from this kind of very crisp, nebulous white to this very smoky, ethereal fog on the left-hand side of the painting, which casts a very dull light on the trees beneath it. Whereas the brightness and the light coming from the clouds, we see very much reflected in the calm, cool mill pond below. We see Constable being very economic with his use of white paint in order to give a sense of this iridescent, kind of shimmering, calm pond below. A particular reflection I love is that there is a lady leaning from the jetty outside of the cottage, and you can see her reaching her arm into the water, and there's a very small ripple of water around her arm as it plunges into the water. But we can see the reflection, very gentle reflection, of her red blouse and her arm in the water below. So when this painting was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1821, it didn't meet a huge amount of success, incredibly surprisingly. And that's because landscape was really quite an inferior genre in painting in the early 19th century in England. That said, it was very much admired by the French academic painter Théodore Géricault, who reported back to France how beautiful this painting was. Subsequently, the painting was sent to Paris in 1824, where it was exhibited at the Paris Salon, and it was awarded a gold medal by the King of France. Now this brings us to our final scene, our night scene painted in France by the French painter Jean-Baptiste-Camille Corot in around 1858. Now this painting is one in a series of 4 paintings, all in the National Gallery collection, that depicts the different times of the day. And this was a very popular theme in the 19th century in France, as it gave artists an opportunity to experiment with the effects of light throughout the day. And I think the most striking element of this painting is not only its very unusual format for a landscape painting, this kind of tall, narrow format, but it is the light, this soft light that emanates from this small moon, which is positioned almost centrally in the composition, illuminating the night sky above it and emitting this kind of gentle glow onto the path in the foreground. I particularly love how the moon just catches the bright red cap worn by this sort of lone figure walking towards us with his dog down the path in the foreground. I also love how the trees plunge upwards into this incredibly powerful night sky that takes up almost half of the composition, drawing our eye up towards these tiny flecks of white paint to give the impression of a starry sky. Now, Corot was part of a group of painters known as the Barbizon School of Painters, who were working in and around the village of Barbizon in the Fontainebleau forest just outside of Paris. And they were known for their paintings of landscape scenes, of rural scenes, and paintings of outdoor life, often painting these in the landscape itself. Corot's late works were imbued with a real sense of mood and atmosphere, and they were incredibly revered by collectors. This series of works was in fact purchased by the 19th century British artist Frederick Lord Leighton, who was later president of the Royal Academy, and they hung in Holland Park in West London in his drawing room, and they hung alongside an oil study by John Constable, alongside which I think they would have looked rather lovely. If you're interested in learning more about art history, click here or here. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.